20 years passed since the Xyloth withdrawal, and humanity transformed itself. The scared, desperate species that had barely survived invasion became something new. Not conquerors or empire builders, but survivors who refused to be victims ever again. Captain Jake Morrison, now an admiral, commanded the new defense fleet from his flagship Defiance. The ship was massive, built using both human engineering and captured Xyloth technology. Earth scientists had spent 2 decades studying alien wrecks from the war, learning, adapting, improving. The fleet that defended humanity now was nothing like the force the Xyloth had destroyed. But Jake understood that weapons were only part of the equation. He trained every crew member with the same philosophy. Ships and guns mattered, but what really mattered was the person holding the weapon. Human will, human determination, human refusal to quit. That was humanity's real strength. Claire Dawson governed Mars Colony, elected by popular vote 5 years earlier. The Red Planet had grown tremendously, with new settlements spreading across the surface and deep underground. The population had doubled since the war, reaching 15 million. Mars had its own shipyards now, building vessels for exploration and defense. Claire sometimes thought about the young lieutenant she had been during the invasion. Scared, uncertain, wondering if humanity would survive the week. She had helped organize resistance on Mars, fought with whatever weapons they could find, and watched friends die. That experience shaped everything she did now. Mars would never be defenseless again. Dr. Lisa Grant directed the Advanced Research Institute, a global organization studying alien technology and theoretical physics. Her wartime work cracking Xyloth shields had made her famous, but she never stopped researching. Humanity had survived one invasion. There would likely be others. She worked to give humanity an advantage next time. Her latest project involved studying the remains of Commander Valrek's flagship, recovered from deep space by a salvage expedition. The ship's computer core contained decades of Xyloth military intelligence. Learning what the Xyloth knew about other species gave humanity crucial insights into the galactic community. The galaxy had changed since the war. The Xyloth Empire was collapsing, torn apart by rebellions on conquered worlds. Humanity hadn't started those rebellions, but the human example inspired them. Species that had accepted Xyloth rule for generations suddenly decided they wanted freedom. The lesson was clear. If humans could resist, anyone could. Admiral Hayes died peacefully 12 years after the war, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by millions, both in person and watching across human space. He was remembered not as a military genius, but as the man who refused to surrender when everyone thought the war was lost. His final words to humanity were simple: stay strong, stay free, never quit. Danny Cooper ran a security company, training defense forces for colonies across the solar system. His wartime experience fighting Xyloth occupation troops made him an expert in asymmetric warfare and resistance tactics. He taught that every citizen should know how to fight, how to resist, how to survive if enemies came again. His students sometimes asked if another invasion would happen. Danny always gave an honest answer: probably yes. The galaxy was dangerous and humanity was relatively weak, but the difference now was humanity knew they could survive, knew they could resist, knew they would never surrender. That knowledge was armor stronger than any shield. Commander Kate Phillips became Director of Solar Defense, coordinating military forces across all human settlements. The position gave her authority to implement the lessons learned during the war. Never again would humanity depend on centralized forces that could be destroyed in a single attack. Every colony had its own fleet, its own weapons, its own capacity for independent resistance. If Earth fell, Mars would fight on. If Mars fell, the asteroid colonies would continue. If the entire solar system was conquered, the new settlements and other star systems would become rallying points. Humanity had spread across multiple worlds specifically to ensure survival. First contact with new alien species was always tense. Humanity had been invaded once and remained cautious. But humans also understood the value of peaceful contact. Not every species was hostile. Some were neutral, some were friendly, and some were potentially valuable allies. The Keelar Commonwealth reached out to humanity cautiously, interested in trade and cultural exchange. They were a species that valued art and philosophy over military strength. They had never fought a major war and found humanity's martial culture somewhat frightening. but they were also fascinated by human resilience and determination. Ambassador Maria Lopez represented humanity in negotiations with the Kalar. She worked to present a balanced picture. Yes, humans could be dangerous. Yes, they had fought the Xyloth Empire to a standstill, but humans could also be peaceful, creative, and cooperative. The choice of which humanity you met depended largely on how you approached them. The negotiations resulted in a trade agreement that benefited both species. Humanity gained access to Kalar art and advanced medical technology. The Kalar received human protection and access to military equipment. It was humanity's first real alliance with an alien species, and it demonstrated that not all galactic relationships had to be hostile. Jake Morrison led the first human exploration mission beyond the solar system. His fleet of 5 ships visited 3 nearby star systems over 2 years. They found 2 uninhabited systems with planets suitable for colonization, and 1 system occupied by a pre-industrial species that humanity agreed to leave alone until they developed space travel naturally. The mission proved humanity could expand peacefully when possible. But Jake's ships were heavily armed and his crews trained for combat. The galaxy had taught humanity a hard lesson: hope for peace but prepare for war, trust but verify, extend friendship but keep weapons ready. Claire watched from Mars as the first-generation ships departed for humanity's new colonies. These vessels carried tens of thousands of people each, along with everything needed to build new civilizations. They would travel for decades to reach distant star systems where humanity could establish independent settlements. The logic was strategic: spread humanity across the galaxy so that no single attack could threaten the species. But it was also optimistic. Humans weren't hiding from the galaxy. They were joining it, becoming a permanent part of the galactic community. On human terms. Lisa Grant's research uncovered something interesting in the Xyloth archives. Before invading Earth, Commander Valrek had studied 47 other species. Every single one surrendered when they understood they couldn't win. Valrek had assumed humans would behave the same way because, from his perspective, it was rational to surrender when victory was impossible. He never understood that humans didn't always act rationally by Xyloth standards. Human decisions were influenced by emotions, beliefs, and cultural values that the Xyloth considered irrelevant to military calculations. That blindness had cost the Xyloth Empire everything. Danny Cooper trained his 10,000th student, a young woman from the Europa colony who wanted to learn defensive tactics. She asked him what made humans different from other species. Why had humanity survived when so many others had fallen? Danny thought about it carefully. He told her that humans had a strange relationship with hopeless situations. Where other species saw impossible odds and surrendered, humans saw impossible odds as a challenge, not because they were stupid or suicidal, but because something deep in human psychology refused to accept limitations. Throughout human history, people had faced extinction events, disasters, and wars. Sometimes they survived through luck, sometimes through ingenuity, but always through refusal to give up. That trait was so ingrained in human culture that it seemed natural. But from an outside perspective, it was bizarre and dangerous. The student asked if that meant humans were better than other species. Danny said no. Different, not better. Other species had their own strengths. But when it came to pure, stubborn determination, humans were probably unmatched in the galaxy. Whether that was a blessing or a curse depended on the situation. Kate Phillips reviewed reports from intelligence sources across the galaxy. The Xyloth Empire had collapsed completely, fragmenting into dozens of smaller states. Some were democratic, others authoritarian, but none were expansionist anymore. The cost of the Earth campaign had bankrupted their military and destroyed confidence in their government. Other species watched humanity warily. The humans who had fought the Xyloth were becoming an economic and political force in the galaxy. Not through conquest, but through trade, diplomacy, and strategic alliances. Human stubbornness, which made them dangerous enemies, also made them reliable friends. Humans didn't abandon commitments easily. 20 years after the war, humanity held a memorial service for those who died during the invasion. 30 million names were read aloud over the course of 3 days, broadcast across human space. Jake Morrison stood with other survivors and remembered friends who never came home. The ceremony ended with a simple statement. They died so humanity could live free. That wasn't empty rhetoric. Every person who fought the Xyloth, whether they survived or not, had made the same choice. Freedom over safety, resistance over surrender, Death over slavery. Claire Dawson watched from Mars. The Xyloth fleet withdrew from Earth orbit slowly, maintaining defensive formation, ready to respond if humans attacked. But no attack came. The surviving human ship simply watched, too damaged and depleted to do anything else. It took 6 hours for the alien fleet to retreat beyond the moon's orbit, and another day to leave the solar system entirely. Commander Valrek sat alone in his command chamber, writing his final report. He knew what it meant to retreat without victory. The Xyloth High Council would consider it the greatest failure in their empire's history. He would be executed, his genetic line eliminated, his name erased from all records. But he had made the only rational choice available. He wrote that humanity was unlike any species the Xyloth had encountered. They possessed adequate technology and competent military tactics, but those weren't what made them dangerous. The real threat was their absolute refusal to accept defeat. They would sacrifice anything, destroy everything, accept extinction itself rather than surrender their freedom. Valrek calculated that conquering Earth would require destroying the entire planet and exterminating the species. Even then, the scattered colonies would continue fighting, turning the conflict into a generational war of attrition. The cost in Xyloth lives and resources would dwarf anything the Empire had ever spent. Earth simply wasn't worth it. He ended his report with a warning. Other species should avoid humanity. These creatures fought not because they believed they could win, but because surrender was incomprehensible to them. That made them more dangerous than any weapon or technology. The galaxy had feared human weapons. Now it needed to fear human will. On Earth, people emerged from shelters and bunkers to see the alien fleet departing. Many couldn't believe it. They had been losing badly. The Xyloth had destroyed most of humanity's military might. How could they be retreating? Admiral Hayes understood. He had gambled everything on one insight about human nature. Humans could lose every battle and still win the war because winning and losing weren't measured the same way for humans as for other species. The Xyloth calculated victory in territory taken and resources gained. Humans measured it in freedom preserved and will unbroken. Jake Morrison was picked up by a rescue shuttle 3 days after the battle. His escape pod had been drifting in the asteroid belt, life support barely functioning. He was one of 12 survivors from the forward screen that had included 500 ships. When they told him the Xyloth had withdrawn, he started laughing. It seemed impossible, but it had happened. Captain Linda Hayes never made it home. She died when her mining ship exploded against a Xyloth battleship. But her sacrifice and the sacrifices of thousands like her had made the difference. Each death raised the cost of conquest, made victory more expensive, pushed the Xyloth closer to the point where continuing wasn't rational. Danny Cooper survived the ground battle in Seattle, one of 40 fighters from his original 200. They had held their positions until the Xyloth retreat, attacking with everything they had. When the aliens finally left, Danny and his survivors emerged from the ruins and began helping with rescue efforts. Claire Dawson on Mars organized the reconstruction of the colony settlements. The Xyloth occupation had been brutal but brief. Mars had resources and people who knew how to survive in harsh conditions. They would rebuild, and next time they would be better prepared. Commander Kate Phillips survived the fall of her orbital platform. Her escape pod landed in the Pacific Ocean, and she was rescued by a naval vessel. She was promoted to admiral and given command of rebuilding Earth's orbital defenses. The work would take years, but Kate had learned crucial lessons about what worked and what didn't. Dr. Lisa Grant continued her research into shield technology and weapon systems. The techniques she developed during the war became the foundation for the next generation of human military technology. She never took credit for saving humanity, always insisting that the real heroes were the ones who died implementing her theories. Dr. Henry Sullivan's work cracking, Xyloth communications became the basis for new encryption systems that protected human data from alien intelligence. He returned to academic life after the war, but remained a consultant for military intelligence. The war's cost was enormous. 30 million dead, hundreds of cities damaged or destroyed, the economy in ruins, the military reduced to a fraction of its pre-war strength. But humanity had survived. They had faced a superior enemy and refused to break, and that refusal had been enough. 6 months after the Xyloth withdrawal, their empire made an official announcement. Earth and its solar system were declared off limits. No Xyloth ship would enter human space. No contact would be attempted. The reasoning given in their statement was simple. Humans were too unpredictable and too willing to accept casualties. Conquering them wasn't worth the cost. The news spread across the galaxy. Other species that had been conquered by the Xyloth heard the story and began to question their own submission. If humans could resist, why couldn't they? Rebellion started on a dozen worlds. The Xyloth Empire, which had seemed invincible, suddenly faced challenges everywhere. Admiral Hayes retired after the war, his body worn out from stress and injuries. But he remained a symbol of human resistance. When asked how humanity had survived, he always gave the same answer. Humans survived because they refused to do anything else. It was that simple and that complicated. Jake Morrison took command of the rebuilt Sentinel Station, the same defense platform he had lost during the first Xyloth attack. He trained new crews with one central lesson. Technology mattered, tactics mattered, but will mattered most. Never surrender, never quit, never accept defeat. The human government established a new military doctrine based on lessons from the war. Future defenses would be decentralized, redundant, and resistant to single-point failures. Every colony, every settlement, every individual would be capable of independent resistance. No enemy would ever again be able to defeat humanity by destroying one fleet or capturing one planet. Earth's reconstruction took a decade. Cities were rebuilt, often stronger than before. The space industry expanded dramatically as humanity realized how vulnerable they had been. New colonies were established, new defensive positions created, new weapons developed. But the most important change was psychological. Humans understood now that they lived in a dangerous universe. Other species existed, and some of them were hostile. Humanity could never assume peace would last. They had to remain strong, remain vigilant, remain ready to fight if necessary. The galaxy watched humanity's recovery with mixed feelings. Some species admired human resilience, others feared it. A few thought humans were dangerously insane for refusing to surrender when clearly beaten, but all of them understood one crucial fact. Humanity had defeated the Xyloth Empire not through superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. That made them unique in the galaxy, and uniqueness could be either inspiring or terrifying depending on your perspective. Commander Valrek's final report became required reading in military academies across multiple civilizations. It was studied not as a tale of defeat but as a warning about underestimating opponents. The Xyloth had made one fatal error. They studied human weapons and prepared counters. They never bothered to understand the humans themselves. The war's title became a proverb in many languages. They feared our weapons but not our will until now. It meant that visible strength was less important than invisible determination. You could see weapons and calculate their power, but will was hidden until tested, and by then it might be too late. The Xyloth Reserve Fleet was magnificent and terrible. 600 warships, the accumulated might of an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds. They moved through space in perfect formation, their weapons charged, their shields at full power. Commander Valrek watched from his flagship and allowed himself to feel confident. This force was unstoppable. Admiral Hayes stood in the command center deep beneath Geneva and studied the tactical displays. The numbers were clear and brutal. Humanity had perhaps 150 functional warships left, plus another 300 civilian vessels that had been hastily armed. Against 600 Xyloth warships, the odds were impossible. He activated the general channel, speaking to every human ship, every station, every soldier preparing to fight. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had accepted what was coming. He told them they were facing extinction, that victory by conventional measures was impossible. But he also told them something else. The Xyloth thought they were fighting for territory, for resources, for expansion of their empire. Humans were fighting for survival, for freedom, for the right to exist. That difference mattered. It meant humans would do things the Xyloth couldn't predict, make sacrifices the aliens couldn't understand. Hayes ended his speech with simple words. Do your duty, make them pay for every meter, and never surrender. Jake Morrison led the forward screen, a mixed force of military and civilian ships positioned in the asteroid belt. His orders were to delay the Xyloth advance, buy time for Earth's final preparations. Everyone understood what that meant. The forward screen wouldn't survive to see the main battle. The Xyloth fleet entered the belt and Jake gave the order to attack. Human ships emerged from hiding among the asteroids, firing everything they had. A civilian mining hauler rammed a Xyloth cruiser, its captain dying in the explosion. Military frigates traded shots with enemy battleships, surviving just long enough to do damage before being destroyed. Jake's fighter took a hit that sheared off the entire tail section. He fought the controls, trying to line up one more shot. Knowing his craft was dying around him, he managed to launch his last missile before the fighter broke apart. He ejected, his pod tumbling through the debris field, and watched the battle continue without him. Captain Linda Hayes commanded a makeshift fleet of mining ships hidden deep in the asteroid belt. These vessels were slow and ugly, built for hauling ore, not fighting wars. But they were large and could carry massive amounts of explosives. Linda had volunteered for this mission knowing it was one way. When the Xyloth fleet was fully engaged with Jake's forward screen, Linda's mining ships attacked from the flanks. They were easy targets, barely shielded, but they didn't need to survive long. Each ship aimed for a Xyloth warship and detonated its cargo on impact. 15 mining vessels destroyed or crippled 20 enemy ships in suicide runs that lit up the asteroid belt like a string of new suns. Commander Kate Phillips watched from Earth's orbital defense platforms. The forward screen was gone, the mining fleet destroyed, but they had bought precious time. The Xyloth fleet had lost perhaps 50 ships, barely 10% of their force. It wasn't nearly enough. She activated the secondary defense line, satellites armed with nuclear weapons, converted space stations bristling with missiles, the remnants of Earth's orbital navy. They opened fire as the Xyloth fleet closed range and space filled with explosions and crossing fire. The battle was chaos. Ships died by the dozens on both sides. Human vessels used the suicide tactics Lisa Grant had developed, waiting for shield drops and sacrificing themselves for single shots. Xyloth warships methodically destroyed the orbital defenses, their superior technology and numbers grinding down humanity's last organized forces. On Earth's surface, Danny Cooper launched his attack against Xyloth ground forces. 200 resistance fighters hit enemy positions across Seattle, trying to prevent reinforcements from reaching the space battle. They used captured alien weapons, homemade explosives, and sheer desperation. Most died in the first minutes, but they kept fighting. Claire Dawson led a similar attack on Mars, her resistance group striking Xyloth supply lines and communication centers. The aliens had troops to spare, but every soldier diverted to fight rebels was one less supporting the fleet. Aboard the Xyloth flagship, Commander Valric began to understand something was wrong. His fleet was winning. Human forces were being destroyed, but the cost was higher than any previous campaign. 25% casualties and climbing with no end in sight. The humans weren't retreating or surrendering. They were fighting to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. He received reports of ground forces under attack across Earth and Mars. Nothing serious, just small rebel groups with inadequate weapons. But they were everywhere, forcing him to keep troops committed to occupation duty instead of supporting the fleet battle. It was inefficient and frustrating. More concerning were the intelligence reports about human morale. It wasn't breaking. Destroying their ships didn't break it. Killing their soldiers didn't break it. Even watching their homeworld burn didn't break it. If anything, the humans were fighting harder now than at the start of the war. Admiral Hayes moved to Earth's Atmospheric Defense Command as the orbital battle raged overhead. The Xyloth were winning, pushing through the defense platforms, getting closer to Earth itself. He activated humanity's final prepared positions, ground-based weapons that could fire into space, civilian and military aircraft ready to ram enemy ships if they entered the atmosphere. Kate Phillips's platform took a direct hit. She ordered evacuation as the station began to break apart. Her crew loaded into escape pods, but Kate stayed at her post, using the platform's weapons until the power failed. She fired the last missiles manually, then rode the platform down as it fell toward Earth's atmosphere. The Xyloth fleet reached Earth orbit. They had lost 140 ships, nearly 25% of their force. The human fleet was effectively destroyed. Commander Valric should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt uncertain. The humans still weren't surrendering. He broadcast a message to Earth offering terms: stop fighting, and humanity would be allowed to survive. Continue, and he would order the bombardment of every major city until nothing remained. It was a final chance to end this madly expensive war. The response came from Admiral Hayes, speaking from a bunker that was taking fire from orbital strikes. His voice was calm despite the explosions audible in the background. He rejected the terms and explained why. Humans understood something the Xyloth didn't. Freedom and dignity were worth any price, even extinction. Humanity would rather cease to exist than live as slaves. That wasn't bravado or empty threat. It was simple truth. Every human, from soldiers like Jake Morrison to civilians like the factory workers who sabotaged equipment, had made the same choice. Death before surrender. Hayes ended his message with words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. He said that humans don't quit because quitting isn't in their nature. You can kill humans, but you can't defeat them. The only way to stop humanity is to destroy every last person. And even that might not be enough. Humans would be remembered, and that memory would inspire resistance in others. Commander Valrek stared at his tactical displays, at the casualty reports, at the projections showing what it would take to actually conquer Earth. He would need to glass the planet, burn every city, kill billions. His fleet could do it, but the cost would be enormous. And even then, the colonies would continue fighting. Mars, the asteroid settlements, the outer system bases. The war would continue for years. He thought about the 47 worlds his empire had conquered before Earth. They had surrendered when they understood they couldn't win. They had been rational. Earth was something else entirely, something the Xyloth had never encountered. An enemy that would rather die than submit. Valrek made a decision that no Xyloth commander had ever made before. He ordered the fleet to withdraw. The war entered its second month, and the Xyloth Empire faced something they had never experienced before. On every world they had conquered, resistance collapsed within weeks. Superior technology and overwhelming force had always been enough. Earth was different. Earth refused to break. Colonel Andrew Mitchell commanded what remained of the Lunar Defense Forces. The moon had been heavily bombed during the first attack, with most military installations destroyed. But the underground sections survived, and Mitchell gathered about 300 soldiers and pilots in the surviving tunnels. They had limited supplies, damaged equipment, and no reinforcements coming. Mitchell planned an attack that everyone knew was suicide. A Xyloth command carrier orbited the moon, coordinating invasion fleets across the solar system. If they could destroy it even temporarily, it might disrupt enemy operations. Mitchell called for volunteers, and every single person stepped forward. They launched 12 fighters, old craft with patched hulls and failing systems. The plan was simple and desperate. Get close to the command carrier, overwhelm its defenses through sheer determination, and do as much damage as possible before being destroyed. No one expected to survive. Lieutenant Amy Rogers flew wing position in the formation. She was 24 years old, fresh from the academy when the war started. She had watched the Xyloth destroy her training station, killing her instructors and classmates. Now she pushed her dying fighter toward the massive alien ship, ignoring the defensive fire that tore through her squadron. 9 fighters died in the approach. 3 reached the command carrier, their weapons hammering against the shields. Amy's craft took multiple hits, losing power and life support. Her controls were failing, but she had one option left. She aimed her fighter directly at the carrier's reactor section and pushed the throttle to maximum. The fighter hit at full speed, its fusion core detonating on impact. The explosion tore through the carrier's weakened shields and ripped open the hull. Secondary blasts rippled along the ship's length as ammunition stores cooked off. The command carrier began to break apart, its crew evacuating in escape pods. No one from Mitchell's squadron survived, but their sacrifice destroyed the Xyloth's main coordination hub. For 6 hours, enemy fleets across the solar system operated without central command, giving human forces a brief advantage that they exploited ruthlessly. Dr. Henry Sullivan worked in a basement laboratory in London, trying to crack Xyloth communication systems. He was a linguist and computer scientist, drafted into military service when the invasion began. The Xyloth used quantum encryption that should have been impossible to break, but Henry had a theory. Every system had flaws, patterns that repeated if you looked long enough. He worked for 72 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination. His team captured Xyloth transmissions, analyzed them, built models, and tested theories. Finally, at 3 in the morning on the third day, Henry cracked the encryption. Suddenly, human forces could intercept every enemy communication. What they heard was surprising. The Xyloth commanders were arguing. Some wanted to increase the bombardment, to break human will through overwhelming violence. Others recommended a different strategy, suggesting withdrawal and negotiations. The cost in ships and soldiers was exceeding all projections. Earth was supposed to be conquered by now. Commander Valrek faced pressure from the Xyloth High Council. They demanded to know why a primitive species was causing such problems. Valrek explained that humans were unlike any enemy they had encountered. They had no central authority to capture. Destroying their military didn't end the fighting. Every city, every settlement, every individual seemed ready to continue the war independently. The council didn't accept excuses. They ordered Valrek to end the war within 30 days or face execution. Valrek committed his reserve fleet to one massive assault on Earth. He would crush human resistance through sheer overwhelming force, destroy their industrial capacity, and occupy every major city. It would be brutal and costly, but it would end the war. Captain Chris Bradley defended Luna Base 7 with a mixed force of soldiers, miners, and civilians. The Xyloth sent 3,000 troops to capture the base, which controlled vital sensor arrays. Bradley had 200 defenders, minimal ammunition, and no chance of victory through conventional fighting. He rigged the entire base with explosives. Every corridor, every chamber, every tunnel was wired to blow. When Xyloth troops breached the outer doors, Bradley's people fought a retreat deeper into the complex. They made the aliens pay for every meter, falling back slowly, drawing them in. When half the Xyloth force was inside the base, Bradley triggered the charges. The explosion collapsed the entire facility, burying thousands of tons of lunar rock on top of the alien troops. Bradley and his defenders died in the blast, but they took 3,000 Xyloth soldiers with them. Similar stories played out across human space. On Mars, Claire Dawson led a raid that destroyed a major Xyloth supply depot. In the asteroid belt, mining crews used their industrial equipment to drop rocks on enemy ships, turning simple ore into kinetic weapons. On Earth, resistance groups attacked occupation forces in hundreds of small battles that added up to significant losses. Lieutenant Sarah Price worked in signals intelligence, intercepting and analyzing enemy communications. She discovered something that she immediately reported to Admiral Hayes. The Xyloth High Council was considering withdrawal. The war was too expensive, taking too long, costing too many ships and soldiers. Earth wasn't worth this price. But Commander Valrek refused to accept defeat. He had never lost a campaign, and he wouldn't start now. He would commit everything to one final assault, crush Earth's defenses and force humanity to surrender. The Xyloth Reserve Fleet began moving toward Earth, the largest concentration of alien military power ever assembled. Admiral Hayes understood what was coming. Every intelligence report confirmed it. The Xyloth were gambling everything on one massive attack. If humanity could survive it, if they could inflict enough damage, the Xyloth might actually withdraw. But surviving would require every ship, every pilot, every soldier humanity had left. Hayes issued a general call to arms. Every functional vessel, every person who could fight, everyone who wanted to defend Earth. There would be no reserves held back, no second chance if this failed. It was all or nothing. Jake Morrison had recovered from his injuries and now commanded a mixed squadron of military and civilian craft. Cargo haulers, private yachts, mining ships, anything that could mount a weapon and reach orbit. They weren't a proper fleet, but they were all humanity had left. Danny Cooper's resistance group received orders to attack Xyloth ground forces during the space battle. Keep them busy, prevent them from supporting the fleet. Danny looked at his 200 fighters, armed with whatever weapons they could scavenge, and knew most of them would die. They prepared for the attack anyway. Lisa Grant worked frantically to improve the targeting systems that let human weapons penetrate Xyloth shields. She had refined the technique, making it slightly easier and less suicidal. Not much easier, but every percentage point mattered when you were fighting a vastly superior enemy. Commander Kate Phillips coordinated defensive positions around Earth. The moon, the orbital platforms, the atmospheric defense grid, everything humanity had built over generations. She knew it wasn't enough. The Xyloth fleet was simply too large, too powerful. But humans had one advantage the aliens didn't fully understand yet. Humans could choose to die for something they believed in. That wasn't desperation or insanity. It was a fundamental part of human nature that the Xyloth, for all their study and observation, had failed to grasp. You could destroy human weapons, kill human soldiers, burn human cities, but you couldn't kill the human spirit, the stubborn refusal to surrender that lived in every individual. The Xyloth reserve fleet entered the solar system, and the final battle began. The second day after the invasion, something unexpected began to happen. Small things at first, barely noticeable in the chaos of occupation and destruction. In Denver, a Xyloth supply convoy found the highway bridge collapsed into the river. In Mumbai, alien troops entering a government building triggered explosives that brought down the entire structure. In Sydney, occupation forces lost contact with 3 patrol units that simply disappeared into the suburbs. Dr. Lisa Grant had been a physics professor at MIT before the invasion. Now she stood in an underground facility in Colorado, surrounded by military officers who looked exhausted and desperate. Admiral Hayes had pulled together scientists from across the country, anyone who might help find a weakness in the Xyloth defenses. The aliens had shield technology that made their ships nearly invulnerable to human weapons. Lisa studied the data from the first day's battles. Every missile impact, every laser strike, every kinetic round. The Xyloth shields absorbed incredible amounts of energy without failing. But she noticed something in the power signatures. The shields had to drop for brief moments when the ships fired their own weapons. It wasn't much, maybe half a second, but it was something. Sergeant Danny Cooper was part of the Seattle Resistance. He wasn't special forces or elite military. He had been a supply clerk before the invasion, managing inventory for a naval base that no longer existed. Now he moved through the burned ruins of his city with 30 other survivors, civilian and military mixed together, united by one simple goal. They were going to make the Xyloth occupation as costly as possible. Danny's group hit a Xyloth patrol using nothing but hunting rifles and homemade explosives. They killed 2 aliens and damaged a vehicle before disappearing into the sewer system. It wasn't a great victory, but it felt better than hiding. That same night, 50 other groups across Earth launched similar attacks. The Xyloth had expected resistance from organized military units. They hadn't planned for thousands of small groups fighting independently. Commander Kate Phillips had survived the destruction of her cruiser during the first battle. She made it to Earth in an escape pod, and now coordinated resistance efforts from a bunker in Virginia. Her official rank meant nothing anymore. The chain of command was broken, with units scattered and isolated. But people still needed leadership, so Kate did what she could. She received reports from all over the world. Factory workers sabotaging equipment before the Xyloth could seize it. Farmers burning crops rather than let them feed occupation forces. Engineers destroying bridges, dams, power plants, anything useful. It was desperate and destructive, but it sent a message. Humans would rather destroy their own world than hand it over peacefully. Major Peter Grant established communication with the Mars colonies. Claire Dawson and other survivors were organizing resistance there too. The Xyloth had landed troops near the major settlements, but Mars was huge and mostly empty. Rebel groups used rovers and underground tunnels to move around, hitting supply lines and communication arrays before vanishing into the Red Desert. The Xyloth responded with force. Commander Valrek ordered retaliation strikes against cities where attacks originated. In Cairo, orbital bombardment destroyed an entire neighborhood, killing thousands. In Toronto, occupation troops executed civilians in the streets as punishment for a bombing. The Xyloth strategy was simple. Make resistance so costly that humans would choose surrender over continued suffering. It didn't work the way Valrek expected. Each atrocity made humans angrier, more determined to fight. Parents who lost children wanted revenge. Survivors who lost homes had nothing left to lose. The violence was supposed to break human will. Instead, it hardened it. Lisa made a breakthrough on the third day. She couldn't beat the Xyloth shields directly, but she found a way around them. If human ships concentrated fire on a single point, all hitting during that half-second window when shields dropped, they could do damage. It required perfect timing and coordination, which meant suicide attacks. Pilots would have to get close and wait for the exact moment, ignoring enemy fire. risking everything for one shot. Admiral Hayes approved the new tactic immediately. He called for volunteers, expecting maybe a few dozen brave souls. Instead, 5,000 pilots stepped forward. They knew it was a one-way mission. They volunteered anyway. Jake Morrison was one of those volunteers. He had lost his station, his crew, everything he had spent years building. The Xyloth had taken it all in a few hours. Now he sat in a rebuilt fighter, cobbled together from salvaged parts and prepared to make his death count for something. 50 other pilots would attack with him, targeting a Xyloth cruiser in orbit over North America. The attack happened at dawn. 50 human fighters against one enemy cruiser and its escort screen. The Xyloth defenses destroyed 43 fighters before they got close. The survivors pressed on, dodging fire, their shields failing, their ships falling apart around them. They waited for the moment when the cruiser fired its main weapons. Jake saw his targeting computer light green. The shields were down for half a second. He fired everything, and 6 other pilots did the same. 7 missiles struck the cruiser's hull at nearly the same instant. The ship's armor cracked, and secondary explosions rippled along its length. The cruiser began to list, losing power, its shields flickering. Jake's fighter took a hit that destroyed his left engine. He ejected as the craft spun toward Earth's atmosphere. Only 3 pilots from the original 50 made it back to base. But the cruiser was crippled, the first significant damage humanity had inflicted on the Xyloth fleet. It wasn't much, but it proved that the aliens could be hurt. Commander Valrek studied the battle reports with growing concern. The humans were adapting faster than any species he had conquered before. Their tactics were unpredictable, often suicidal but occasionally effective. His fleet was suffering losses, small ones but losses nonetheless. The invasion was supposed to be over by now. Danny Cooper's resistance group grew from 30 to 200 in less than a week. Survivors found them, seeking a way to fight back. They had almost no supplies, no support, no hope of winning. But they kept fighting anyway, hitting Xyloth patrols, sabotaging equipment, making the occupation as difficult as possible. On Mars, Claire led an attack on a Xyloth supply depot. Her team used mining explosives to destroy fuel tanks and ammunition stores. The blast was visible from orbit, a message to every human on Mars that resistance was still alive. By day 7, the Xyloth ultimatum deadline, Earth had not surrendered. Admiral Hayes broadcast a response on every frequency. It was short and simple. Humanity rejected the terms. There would be no surrender, no negotiation, no peace. The Xyloth could kill humans, destroy their cities, burn their world, but they could never make them quit. Commander Valrek realized he had made a terrible miscalculation. He had studied human weapons and prepared counters for them. He had planned for conventional warfare, for rational opponents who understood when they were beaten. Instead, he faced an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat, that kept fighting even when victory was impossible. The war, he understood with cold certainty, was going to be much longer and bloodier than anyone had predicted. Part 1. The stars looked peaceful from the observation deck of Sentinel Prime. Jake Morrison stood with his coffee, watching Earth rotate below. He had been a defense station commander for 3 years now, and most days were quiet. Too quiet, some said. The defense grid was expensive, and politicians often questioned if humanity really needed so many weapons pointing at empty space. Jake knew better. The universe was vast, and humanity had only explored a tiny fraction of it. They had met a few alien species, traded with some, ignored others. But there were gaps in the star maps, regions where probes disappeared and ships never returned. Something was out there, watching and waiting. The first sign came at 400 hours. Sensors detected movement at the edge of the solar system, near Neptune's orbit. Jake rushed to the command center, still pulling on his uniform jacket. The screens showed dozens of contacts, then hundreds, then thousands. Ships were appearing from nowhere, dropping out of some kind of faster-than-light travel that human scientists had only theorized about. Lieutenant Claire Dawson was already at her station on Mars Colony when the alerts came through. She managed the early warning systems for the outer colonies, and her screens were lighting up like a holiday display. The ships were massive, bigger than anything humanity had ever built. They moved in perfect formation, advancing toward the inner system with clear purpose. Admiral Richard Hayes received the reports in his office on Earth. He was an old man now, with gray hair and tired eyes, but his mind was still sharp. He had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. He activated the emergency protocols and watched as military bases across Earth and its colonies switched to combat status. The alien fleet didn't send a greeting. They didn't ask for dialogue or negotiation. They simply opened fire. The attacks were precise and devastating. Mars Colony Base 3 exploded in a ball of fire that Claire watched from 50 kilometers away. Defense satellites around Earth disintegrated under focused energy beams. The lunar shipyards, where humanity built its largest vessels, became clouds of expanding debris. Jake fought to save Sentinel Prime as alien fighters swarmed around the station. His weapons crews fired everything they had, but the enemy's shields absorbed the impacts like raindrops on glass. One by one, the station's defensive turrets went silent. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors as hull breaches vented atmosphere into space. Down on Earth, people watched the sky light up with burning debris. News channels showed live footage of the battle, and within hours everyone understood that humanity was losing badly. The military had always seemed so powerful, with its fleets of warships and orbital weapons platforms. Now those same weapons were being swept aside like toys. Commander Valrek observed the battle from his flagship, the Desolation. He was Xyloth, a species that had conquered 47 worlds over 3 centuries. His gray skin and 4 arms marked him as a warrior caste, bred for strategic thinking and ruthless efficiency. He had studied humanity for 20 years, cataloging every weapon system, every defensive position, every military base. The humans were performing exactly as predicted. They fought with their ships and stations using conventional tactics that Valrek had prepared counters for. His fleet had superior shields, faster engines, and more powerful weapons. The battle was mathematics, and the numbers favored the Xyloth Empire by an overwhelming margin. Jake evacuated Sentinel Prime when the main reactor started to fail. He gathered his surviving crew, 300 men and women out of an original complement of 2,000, and loaded them onto escape pods. As his pod fell toward Earth, he watched the station explode behind him. 20 years of construction gone in minutes. Claire managed to keep Mars Colony's civilian population calm as the bombardment continued. She organized evacuation shuttles and helped families reach the underground shelters. A young boy asked her if the aliens were going to kill everyone. She knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said something she wasn't sure was true. She told him that humans don't give up, that they would find a way to fight back. By the end of the first day, humanity had lost 60% of its military fleet. The International Space Defense Force, built over decades at enormous cost, was crippled. Dozens of stations and satellites were destroyed. Thousands of soldiers and crew members were dead. The alien fleet had barely been scratched. Admiral Hayes called an emergency meeting of the military command. Generals and admirals from every nation gathered in the underground bunker beneath Geneva. The mood was grim. Some argued for immediate surrender to save what remained of Earth's cities. Others wanted to fight on, though no one could explain how they might win. Hayes stood at the head of the table, his uniform burned from helping survivors in Washington. He reminded them that humanity had faced extinction before. Plagues, wars, natural disasters, each time people had survived by refusing to quit. He didn't have a plan for victory, not yet. But he knew that surrender meant the end of human freedom, possibly forever. The Xyloth broadcast their terms on every frequency in every language. Commander Valrek's translated voice filled the airwaves. Humanity would surrender within 7 days. All military forces would disarm. Earth and its colonies would become part of the Xyloth Empire, governed by alien administrators. Humans would work, serve, and obey. Resistance would be met with destruction of entire cities. Jake landed in what remained of Seattle. The city was burning from orbital strikes, and emergency crews struggled to fight fires and pull survivors from collapsed buildings. He found a military truck and drove to the nearest command post, determined to help however he could. The truck's radio played the Xyloth surrender demand on repeat. Claire watched the alien fleet settle into orbit around Mars. Massive ships hung in the sky like dark moons, blocking out the sun. Troops were landing near the major settlements, beginning occupation operations. The Xyloth soldiers were efficient and cold, treating humans like primitive creatures that needed to be managed. That night, scattered across Earth and a dozen colony worlds, humans faced their darkest hour. Their weapons had failed. Their fleets were destroyed. Their military strength, built over generations, had proven insufficient. The Xyloth Empire had studied humanity's arsenal and found it wanting, but Commander Valrek had made one crucial error in his calculations. He had catalogued humanity's weapons, their ships, their technology. He had prepared for everything he could see and measure. What he hadn't accounted for, what he couldn't understand from his distant observations, was the human heart. 7 days until surrender. The countdown began,